everyone, this is Celine from Blue Calla Patterns and welcome to video 5 for the Rose Gathered Shoulder Bag. We're going to start this video by attaching our zipper panel to our two lining panels and our lining top band pieces. So for now, let's set aside one of the lining panels and one of the lining top band pieces. And if you remember in the previous videos, we made some center marks. This is where they will come in handy. So I think, yeah, so let's start by making our center marks. We want those on the wrong side of the lining top band pieces. You really only need it on the bottom edge, but I will do it on the top and the bottom. And then same thing for the second piece. Okay, so let's start. Usually I do this one step at a time, but I'm just going to pin very carefully and do this all at once. So take your zipper panel and line up that center mark that we made with the center mark at the top of the lining panel, and then take your lining top band piece, and again you want to line up the center marks here, and I'll just add a clip right away so I don't move these out of place, and then clip the rest, and then you'll go over to your machine and sew all of these together with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Like so. Okay, so I'm going to go over and I'm going to sew all the way across. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. So the lining top band is sewn to the lining piece and we have our zipper panel in between. Now you just need to press the lining top band away . And then I'm going to top stitch the seam allowance here at the bottom of the lining top band. Okay, so now this is top stitched. And so you're going to push aside the lining and the lining top band. And then you're going to repeat the exact same steps that we just took. And you're going to attach the other side of your zipper panel to the remaining lining piece and lining top band. So I'm just going to put this here for a second. Grab this piece, make sure that my center marks are aligned, and clip in the middle first, and then clip the rest, and then repeat exactly what we just did by sewing all of these layers together with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, pressing the lining top band away from the lining and the zipper panel, and then top stitching the seam allowance. Now if you're wondering why this doesn't go all the way to the end, that's because I didn't cut my lining panels the right size, so that was my fault. If ever things don't line up, you can just center it, and as long as it's within the seam allowance, it'll still work out. I will do a better job cutting precisely next time. Okay, so I'm going to sew these together, press and top stitch like I did for this side. Okay, so at this stage, this is what your bag's lining should look like. And now we're going to sew the two lining shells together. And usually what I like to do is I start by matching up the lining top band seams. I want the seams here to meet, and then the second thing I'm going to do is line up the bottom center marks, And then I clip the rest in between, and I try to line up my pleats so that they're in the same spot at the bottom of the bag. Okay, so I'm going to pause and finish clipping. I finished clipping the lining panels together. Now I added a tip in the pattern. There's a little tip box here on page 10. Now usually for a bag lining, I always like to sew the sides and the bottom with a larger seam allowance than 3/8 of an inch. Now for this bag, like I showed you at the very beginning when I walked you through what the bag, a completed bag looks like, because of the way that the sides are gathered, you're not going to get a perfectly smooth and perfectly fitting lining with this bag. So if that kind of lining doesn't appeal to you, then probably this bag isn't for you. However, even with that, I think it's always a good idea to use a larger seam allowance when you're sewing the lining of a bag, so that the bottom itself fits nice and snug inside the exterior shell. So what I'll do is I will start at the corner here, backstitch, and I start with the usual 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. But as I'm sewing down, I increase my seam allowance to 1/2 an inch or even 5/8 of an inch. I usually do 5/8 of an inch because the exterior shell usually has interfacing, so it's quite thick, and so you really want to make sure that you use a larger seam allowance when you're sewing your lining pieces. So I use a larger seam allowance all the way down the bottom and the sides here, but then when I get to the top corner here, I return to a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I backstitch when I end. Okay, so the lining shells are sewn together, and I'm just going to trim my seam allowance. And then before we attach the lining shell to the exterior shell, you want to make sure that your interior zipper pocket is open all the way, because we're going to be turning the bag through the bottom of the zipper pocket. So first I open this zipper all the way, and then I just make sure that this zipper pocket is open all the way as well. I usually try to open it as soon as I'm done sewing the zipper pocket, that way there I won't forget. Okay, so now we need our exterior shell. Make sure the straps are pointing down towards the bottom of the bag, and then you want to decide which way you want your bag to open. I like it to open this way, and you stick the exterior inside the lining. Okay, so here another little bit of a challenge is because we have the channels here on the sides. It's going to be a little bit, it's not terrible, but it's a little bit more annoying to sew the top edge around these gathered areas. So when you start pinning, always do your side seams first. I like to open them if possible. So I line those up first. And you should have your center marks on your lining top bands, so you can actually line those up with the center marks on your exterior shell. And then you can clip the rest. So when you get to these areas where you have your channel, you just sort of straighten and clip as best as you can. And when you're sewing the top edges together, take your time and readjust those top edges as necessary. Now when I am sewing the top edge of a bag and I have connectors, like handle connectors or strap connectors, I usually sew twice in those areas, about 1/8 of an inch apart. So 2 seams at the strap connectors. Okay, so I'm going to pause. I'll finish clipping all the way around, and then I'll go over to my machine and I will sew the top edges together, and then we'll be able to turn our bag right side out. Okay, so the top edges are sewn together, and now we can just turn the bag through the bottom of the zipper pocket. And there's only 2 very quick things we need to do. We need to top stitch the top edge of the bag, and we need to sew the bottom of our zipper pocket closed. You can do that either by hand or by machine, whatever you prefer. I really like sewing by machine because I'm not very good at sewing by hand. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to roll the top seam like this. It's a little bit hard to press this one because of the channels. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll the seam and put some clips, and then I'll top stitch the top edge. Make sure that everything is tucked inside. Okay, so I'm going to finish doing that top edge, and then I'm going to pull out the bottom here, and I'm going to clip and sew the bottom of my zipper pocket shut. Okay, and then I'll show you what it looks like when the bag is top stitched and the bottom is shut, and then we're just going to thread our ties and our channels. So there's the bottom edge of my zipper pocket. I've sewn it shut. I try to get as close as I can to the edge and make sure that I get all of the layers of fabric, and then I can just tuck that in. Okay, and then I have to finish top stitching the edge of the bag. I've just completed the top stitching along the top edge of the bag. This is what it looks like now. There's the interior of the bag. And now I'm just going to go get my side ties, and we're going to thread them through the channels. Okay, so the last step is threading our side ties. I'm just using a safety pin, passing it through one end. And you can do it how you like. I usually thread from the bottom up, across, and then down, and then tie the bow at the bottom. But if you want, you can do the reverse, and you can actually thread from the top, down, across, up, and then tie the bow closer to the top. So it's really up to you. Just using my paintbrush handle to get it through, or not. There we go. And I just make sure that it's not twisted here. And then you want an equal, you want an equal amount of the tie coming out the bottom here. And it's twisting and being annoying. Okay, there we go. And take off my safety pin. Need a tiny bit more on this side. Okay, and then you can gather it if you want. I just tie a simple bow. And then that's it. And then you do the same thing for the other side with your second tie. And your bag is done.